it's been written that the that six members of the Israelite community, six Jews or six members of the Israelite community, one from each of the 12 tribes, gathered gathered. I think it even says Library of Alexandria, or at Alexandria, and translated the Hebrew Bible, or the five books of Moses, into Greek, and that became the Septuagint. Septuagint meaning 70 or 72. I think it means 70. So sometimes it's referred to as 72 scholars, sometimes it's 70 scholars. Anyway, that's the way it had been written, and it dates it to the reign of a certain king, certain Greek king, I believe. So that's about the same time. Now, as the Manetho was writing his history of Egypt, and Berosus was writing his history of Babylon. Now, Russell Gamirkin suspects that actually, rather than composing a translation of the five books of Moses, that actually this was a misremembering of the actual writing of the five books of Moses. And then I go to another source of speculation. It's a website called CHAVER.com, and Mel Klein wrote a book. You can read it online on the website. How, in addition to being simply a linear telling of the five books of Moses, in other words, like book by book, verse by verse by verse, chapter by chapter, you can read it that way. There are certain cues that indicate how to break it up into chiastic format. Chiastic format meaning it's poetry. It's ancient poetry. You start with you have this line you start off with, and then this line relates back thematically or literally to this line, and then there are lines after that first line. Like the second line refers to the next to last line. The third line refers to the third to last line, and so forth. Sometimes there's a middle labeled X, that's chi, which is why it's called chiastic structure. There are structural formats, and it's fascinating. Go to that website. I don't want to go into it any further, but he not only delves into that, but he also delves into the reason why, rather than what the documentary hypothesis talks about, there's a better explanation as to why there are two primary names for the divine entity in the five books of Moses, namely Elohim and Yud-He-Vav-He. In English translations, Yud-He-Vav-He is typically translated into the Lord, even though that's a really bad, inaccurate translation of it. It doesn't even relate to what Yud-He-Vav-He means. Yud-He-Vav-He relates to the verb for being, which doesn't have anything to do with the Lord. I don't know where that came from, but and Elohim is typically translated into God. So now you have a hint when you're reading the English translation what the actual Hebrew would read as. All right, so that's not what I want to talk about here. I simply want to introduce you to these elements, these areas of research. Okay, what I want to get to is the timeline. It's more of a chronology. What was the text originally, and how it's evolved through time. There are different versions of the biblical text, Genesis 5 and Genesis 11, and I'll get into that. What was the original, and why do we see variations of it that disagree in these different versions? Namely, you have the Masoretic, you have the Samaritan Pentateuch, and you have at least two primary versions of the Septuagint. I'll give you what's typically the acronyms that scholars use when referring to these texts. The Masoretic version is simply MT, Masoretic text. The Samaritan version is simply SP, Samaritan Pentateuch. And you have LXX, which means 70, in, is it Roman or Greek? I think it's Roman. Yes, Roman. L meaning 50 and X meaning 10. So it's like 50 plus 10 plus 10, 70. There are two versions of the LXX. There's the LXXA, which if I remember correctly, is Alexandrian, and the LXXV, which is Vatican. Now, those refer to certain places, I believe, where it's kept. I don't remember. That's part of later history, why it's labeled those two. I just think of them, to distinguish them, I think of them as simply LXXA and LXXV. One, I guess maybe it was stored or found or kept in the Vatican, and the other one has something to do with the Library of Egypt or Library, Alexandrian. So, as I said before, these are the 5 books of Moses as we understand them. However, there are changes, there are differences between one version and another. And you probably know about the game of telephone, where you start off with one sentence and then that person whispers it to another person, and then that person whispers it to another person. Little errors creep in. Well, by the time you get all the way around the circle of people whispering one to the next, to the next, to the next, the sentence becomes very different, and it could be way off from what the original sentence was. I want to figure out what that original sentence was and why, which changes were made and when were they made. In other words, as you go around the room, the different people whispering to each other, what were the changes? When were the changes made? In other words, person A starts off, whispers it to person B. Person B may hear it correctly and then whisper it to person C, and then when whispering it to person C, may get maybe a word wrong, and then person C hears that sentence with that different word and then whispers it to person D and may goof up something else. So if you look at what person D heard and thinks it was, you don't know what person A originally said, but if you look at person D and then person B or C and then person B, you can figure out, okay, person C had this wrong in addition to this wrong, so he probably heard it after person B. In other words, you can keep track of what the changes were, how similar they were to the original person A, and then you can kind of track in the timeline the evolution of that sentence. All right, so hopefully I was clear on that. Now, this is the table that I made, and these are the notes below. Maybe I will. There's a train going by. Maybe I will add like a better looking graph of this. Although this should look pretty clear. All right, so I made in my notes here. Start off talking about Genesis 5 and Genesis 11. Okay. So here's a short version of Genesis, the beginning of it anyway. It starts off with the creation of the world. It doesn't even say really world; it just says land, and it doesn't say universe at all. The actual Hebrew, which I understand, I can read. So it's sort of vague. It's not talking in historical terms. And other scholars have noted this. You've heard of probably the 7 days of creation. Day 1, you have, on day 1, you have a day being split off from night. and or dark light being split off from darkness, I should say, and then the light is called day and the darkness is called night. And then day two, you have the upper waters and lower waters being split, and then on day three you have the water receding and the land coming in and emerging from these waters, from the lower waters. Then on day four you have the rulers of the day and ruler of the night. Or do I have them? No, the ruler of the day, because it's the sun. The sun, and then the rulers of the night, which would be presumably the stars and the moon. You might be noticing a pattern here. And then the fifth day is the flying creatures. It doesn't say birds, it doesn't say insects or reptiles or whatever. And I think there's a reason why it doesn't bother doing it. It's not a history text. It's not a science text. And that's one of my pet peeves about how the Bible is talked about today. People are so literal. It's more of a philosophical text. It's, I guess, metaphysical text. The whole Bible, well, at least the 5 books of Moses, as a set, it's a metaphysical text. It's not supposed to be taken literally. It's not supposed to be taken as a science textbook. Day 5, you have the something like the winged creatures, the flying creatures of the air, and the creatures of the land. And then on day 6, you have the vegetation and the atom. It doesn't say humanity, it says the atom as an androgynous being. Or it may say Ish. I'm trying to remember. Ish and Isha, male and female. Yeah, I'm mixing Genesis 1 and Genesis 2. Maybe mixing them accidentally. I'm not sure if it says the atom in Genesis 1. I know it's Ish and Isha, male and female. He created them. He, meaning Elohim, created them. That's another thing. In chapter 1, it's Elohim, and then in chapter 2, 2 and 3, I think 4, it's Yud He Vav He. That's a whole other thing. I may mention that. It's talked about, good explanations provided in Mel Klein's chaver.com website, chaver.com. I'll just say it now, that there is a, rather than 2 different writers using different names for God, it's possible that there are 2 aspects of God. There's a personal aspect, which would be Yud He Vav He, which is related to the number 7, which is related to the mind and the heart and ethics and commandments. And then there's another aspect, Elohim, which is related to the physical environment surrounding us. And that's the way, I guess, God has been perceived. God is either talked about in terms of a creative being that creates things, and God is also talked about as like a father figure, a parental figure, and that's more like Yud He Vav He. So that's what I mean by metaphysical. It's not a textbook. It's like a philosophical treatise or philosophical outlook on things. So anyway, as I'm talking about these 6 days of creation, you might have, and then the 7th is Elohim ceasing from creative work. Now you may have noticed the pattern. You can split them into 2 columns. You have day 1, which would be and all the days, 1, 2, and 3 in this first column all relate to one emerging and dividing itself off from the other, akin to the Israelites escaping Egypt and becoming a nation themselves, It's also like Eve being split from Adam and becoming a separate entity. It's like, even as Mel Klein speculates, um, it's like Adam and Eve separating from Eden, or the Garden of Eden, and also Elohim and Yud He Vav He splitting. It, at least in terms of the our minds or our perception, the way it's written in the Torah, in the five books of Moses. Um, there's one entity. I don't want to. I'm saying this because I don't want people to get the impression that the text is promoting polytheism or the idea that there is more than one God. Far from it. There's only one God, um, and the Bible makes it very clear. It's just that the entity takes on different roles or different personae, namely the two Yud He Vav He or Elohim, depending on the context. Okay, so all right, so you have in the first column you have day one, which would be light being separated from the darkness, and then light is called day and darkness is called night, and that rings through for the whole all 3 days in this first column. There's a division and a distinction from what it's been divided from, and then both entities are named. In the second day, you have, so it's not really a creation, it's more like a division and recognition of something that's now separate. And then day two, so I should mention that's parallel to day 4, which would be the creation of the luminaries that govern or rule the day and the ones that govern and rule the night. So you see in the first column, that first day, it's a division, and then in the parallel day, in day 4, it's the creation of entities that have name. Do they have name? No, they don't have name. For one thing, what's created in the parallel day is a multitude. In the first column, you have a division, and they're single things. You have a single night, a single darkness, and a single light divided off from the single darkness. However, that's day 1. And then the parallel day 4, you have multiples. You have stars that govern the night. And then in the second day, you have the upper water and lower water dividing. And then in day 5, which is the counterpart to day 2, you have the multitude of creatures flying in the sky and the multitude of creatures roaming on land. And then you have insects and so forth. I'm speculating that, and this is not based on anything that I've read other than the text itself, but I'm speculating that maybe that's the origination of the origin of the kosher rules. You're not supposed to eat certain animals. I'm just speculating that maybe those animals that you're not supposed to eat are ones that share, like kind of dwell in 2 different zones of this 3-level world environment. So you have the heavens, then you have the heavens. That would be night and day, and so forth. That the stars and so forth. Then and the moon, the sun, and so forth. Then you have the middle zone, which would be upper and lower waters. And you have the fish in the lower waters and created in day 5, and the birds created also in day 5. You have the birds even within that. You have the fish, and you have the birds, which can both land on the water and fly up towards the heavens. So they're intermediaries. And then on day 3 and day 6, that's the ground. You have the waters receding and the land appearing. And then in day 6, you have vegetation growing out, and multitudes of vegetation growing out of that land that appeared as the waters receded. So you have the land, you have the intermediary period, like intermediary zone, and then you have the heavens. And this plays a big part in Mel Klein's book. It's a 3-level thing, and this whole scheme is reversed in the 10 plagues of Egypt. And you notice where the plagues come from. It also plays that role of the 3, the heavens, the land, and then in intermediary spot. And even in Mount Sinai, or actually in Hebrew it's Har Sinai, Mount Sinai, you have 3 zones. You have the land where there's the Israelites gather together, and then you have a zone above that where you have the elders, and then the zone above that you have Moses meeting directly with God, or Yud He Vav He specifically. So it's there's a tiered construction, and I read somewhere it was I forget her name. It's a female author, scholar, anthropologist. She talked about how even the way that you prepare the sacrifices, the animal sacrifices in Leviticus, there are 3 parts of the animal, and in the Temple of Solomon, there's an outer court, and then there's a middle chamber, and then there's the Holy of Holies, a central chamber, and even within that, you have the Holy of Holies. So you have 3 parts. That comes up a lot. Okay, so you have these 3 zones created in the 6 days of creation, and then to make like an explanation to it, you have an explanation point to it. You have Elohim ceasing from creative work on the 7th day. So you have the 7 days. It's not, people mistake it. You can take it literally to mean Elohim is creating the world, though, I don't want to say universe because it doesn't say universe. It just says, it talks about the land, it talks about the water, and then you infer from that the world. But it doesn't, anyway, maybe you get the picture. Not a matter of the planet. It doesn't say planet, it doesn't say universe or whatever. It just says the environment. I'll just refer to it as it's creation of what's around us. So you can take it literally like that, or you can also take it that it's establishing this 2-column, in the case of the plagues of Egypt, it's actually 3 columns, this setup, this framework structure of columns and rows. And in Mel Klein's explanation, he maps out every book. Each book can be divided up into parts and so forth. The whole work is an exercise in this. The whole work is this structure of columns and rows. So it's a brilliant way of setting this up. Even the 10 Commandments is really 2 columns broken up into it's 5 pairs of commandments, and they go from the top 2 commandments referring to the divine, the bottom 2 commandments referring to humanity and subjectivity, and this is objectivity, this is subjectivity, and then down, and then there's a middle pair of commandments and so forth. And you find that also in the Mishnah in that same structure. In Pirkei Avot, which would be loosely translated as the ethics of our fathers. So it's like this scheme, this layout is is being laid out by the author in the 7 days of creation. Those who just take it literally are just reading, they think they're just reading about a simple creation of everything. But on a metaphysical level, on a philosophical level, it's literally laying out this pattern. It's a brilliant idea. So that's Elohim, and then, all right, so getting back to what I'm going to talk about, which would be the flood and everything. Okay, so, but I wanted to get that out there. All right, so there's a creation, and we jump into the Adam and Eve story, the Garden of Eden. Yud-Hey-Vav-Hey creates an androgynous being called the Adam, and then splits off Eve from that, and I won't get into that, but you get Cain being the first child, and then Cain and Abel being the first child. Cain kills Abel, and then he wanders off, and then there's a third child, Seth, and then from that you get a lineage. So in chapter 5, it then says, these are the generations of the heavens and the earth. Adam was, and it gives 3 numbers. It says Adam was so-and-so years old, actually 130 years old, if you're reading the Masoretic version of it, 130 years old when he beget Seth. And then the number of years after he beget Seth were 800. So altogether, he lived, his days were 900. Notice it says days, not years. The days of Adam were 930 years. That's basically 130 plus 800, 130 until begetting Seth, and then 800 after begetting Seth. So altogether, it's 930. Okay, so it follows that path, like rigidly follows that structure. The number of years until begetting the child, and then number of years after begetting the child, and then the total number of years, or days actually. So it goes through 10 generations. I should make an exception to that. I should point out an exception to that. With the 7th generation, Enoch, actually in Hebrew it's not Enoch, it's Hanok. You may have heard of Hanukkah. Hanok refers to dedication. So his name literally means dedication. Hanukkah means dedication. Hanok would mean dedicate. I'd like to know why the names are the way they are. Anyway, goes through 10 generations. You get to Noah being the 10th generation, Adam being the member of the first generation. Then there comes a flood, and Noah is 600 years old when the flood occurs. Notice how high these numbers are, and that's your first clue that there's a pattern here. These are not literal people as we know people today. You have, let me see. Well, here's the lifespan right here, the list of lifespans. Adam is 930, Seth is 912, Enosh is 905, Kenan is 910, 895, 962, 365, 969, and so on. Altogether, Noah lives a total of 950 years. Okay, so Noah and the flood. So he survives the flood in an ark with his wife and the kids. And then he has 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Yefet, or Shem, Ham, and Japheth, if you're reading the original Hebrew or some English transliteration from Greek. Okay, then we follow the Shem line, and we get, that's 10, so Shem would be number 11, and then we get these next ones down to Terah, and then Terah is the father of Abram. Notice it's not Abraham, it's Abram, because in the story when he meets, he's 100, he's 99, and God said, Elohim says, you will be the father of many nations. Avram means exalted father, but his name gains a hey in the middle, an H, it's a Hebrew H, hey, the letter hey, in the middle of his name to become Avraham, the father of many. And that's why his wife Sarai, the Yud, the Y sound at the end of her name, changes to an H or Hey letter. Becomes Sarah. So she's 89, he's 99. There's a 10-year difference between them. So, she laughs when she hears that she's going to give birth to a child at the age of 90, and then he would be 100. So then she laughs, and there's a child. The name is Isaac, and then there's also a twin, Ishmael. That's a whole other story. But Isaac is a verb that refers to laughing, cajoling. You get the idea. Carousing, sort of. So then Isaac has a child. We'll skip the twins. Basically it's Abraham begets Isaac and Ishmael. Ishmael leaves the picture, leaves the scene, and Isaac then begets twins, Jacob and Esau, and Esau leaves the picture, and so it's Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. That's why you have the phrase God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Now Jacob then has 12 sons and I think a daughter. The daughter is Dinah, but roughly it's 12 sons, and each son is the progenitor of a tribe. So that's how you get the 12 tribes of Israel. And Jacob, by the way, gets a new name, Israel. Like literally, he has two names. He has Jacob and he has Israel. And many characters in the Bible have, or specifically in the Pentateuch, have two names. It's like God self has Yud He Vav He and Elohim, depending on what role is the context. The context calls for. I would think the more personal aspect of Jacob would be Jacob, and then the sort of more national context for Jacob is Israel. That's my guess. But there are other characters that have the similar. Anyway, so that's why it's called the 12 tribes of Israel. So one tribe is Judah, and another tribe is Levi. Now, Judah, from Judah. Oh, and then, wait, one is Judah. I'll skip Judah. That's kind of irrelevant now. One child is Levi, and another child is Joseph. So there's a story of Joseph going into, somehow getting into Egypt. I won't get into that. And Levi is one of the other brothers. Now, here I go back. Now, notice I didn't mention Joseph in here. This lineage goes from Adam, Isaac, Jacob, Levi, Kohath, Amram, and then finally Moses. And aside from the two children that are mentioned once, one verse in the two children of Moses that are mentioned, I think, once. Aside from that, Moses' lineage is where Moses is where that lineage ends. That whole, all those 26 different characters, it's where it ends. Where in the end of Deuteronomy, we're left with the death of Moses, and that's it. And then his successor Joshua then takes it up, and in the book of Joshua and onward. But I want to point out that we have 26 generations, suspiciously close to the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet. I don't know why 26, I don't know. But there is something very suspicious that Noah is the 10th generation. When I say generation, I mean like the named character in this list. The 10th generation, 10 being a common number that shows up in the Torah. You have 10 commandments. There are instances of 10. You also have instances of 12, the 12 tribes. Not only the 12 tribes of Israel, but you have earlier the brother of Isaac. You have his 12 tribes that he began. And 12 here and 12 here and so forth. 7 is a common number that pops up. You have 7 days in the week and so forth. So I mentioned earlier on, Enoch is the seventh. Now, in another tradition, the Babylonian history, as recorded by the